White, and this is reporting live from the universe. This is the beginning of a 2-hour program, and boy, I have such a fascinating guest on tonight. I am so excited to have an interview with Gregg Braden. He's a New York Times bestselling author of so many books, The Divine Matrix, The Spontaneous Healing of Belief. We're going to be talking about his new book, which hit the bestsellers list in 2 weeks, Fractal Time. And he talks about all the energy building up around 2012 and some of the cycles of the Mayan calendar. I don't know if you're aware of it, but we are ending a 5,000-year-old cycle. It's the 5th cycle, and as Gregg has explained it in the interview, it is the end of a great world age. So, there's been a lot of hype around this. There's movies in Hollywood about 2012 and things like that, but it really isn't Armageddon, according to Gregg Braden. It is an opportunity for us to explore, to grow, and to expand into many different philosophies and beliefs. So just hang in there in this conversation with best-selling author Gregg Braden. Good news for all of you listeners, I have added an 800 number to the show. So if you want to call in, that number is 877-218-1287. And I'm going to say that again really slowly, 877-218-1287. And again, my name is Kristen White. I'm the host of the show. And just a little bit about me. I'm the founder of a holistic wellness center located here in the Midwest called The Energy School. And I'm in the process of creating an online university where people can come together and learn about a lot of different healing modalities from master teachers. I'm also a Karuna Reiki master, and I teach those classes. I've studied Tibetan energy, medicine. I teach meditation, just so many different things. Intuition, there's a class I've created called Spirituality Boot Camp. I just spent the last 2 days exploring and learning the work of Bert Hellinger, and he is out of Germany, and his work is in the area of family constellations and family mapping. And the philosophy behind his work is that inside our family system, we have traumas. We have events that color our reality today. Sometimes these show up as illnesses, phobias, anxiety, sadness, depression. All kinds of different expressions come from our family system, specifically our mother and our father, and the relationship that they had. So really amazing, fascinating work, family constellations and family mapping. So if that's something that resonates with you, we're not going to go into it in depth tonight on the show, but that is available. More information on that on my website, which is www.theenergyschool.net. And that's spelled like it sounds, T-H-E, energyschool.net. Or you can also just visit my personal website, which is Kristen, Kristen, White33.com. And the reason this show is called Reporting Live from the Universe with Kristen White is because I spent more than a decade as a TV news reporter. And during that time, I really felt like there was just a lot of negative news out there in the world. And so, as a way to counterbalance that and just add positive energy out into the airwaves and into the universe, each week on my show, I do a really fun thing called the Good News Report. So I'm just going to give you the good news right now for this week. We've all heard of dating services like It's Just Lunch. They're designed to connect us with our soulmate. Well, now there's a speed dating for doctors. In Fort Worth, Texas, there's a new event called Doc Shop. The creators say it's an opportunity for patients to casually meet and size up a lot of doctors in a short amount of time. Patients spend about 5 minutes each at tables asking doctors questions about their practice, and the event includes lunch. This is the first program of its kind in the U.S. One of the participating physicians said there's a new attitude in medicine where patients want to feel like their doctor is their friend. In China, the Chinese government is considering a ban on eating dogs and cats. In Asia, it's commonplace to find these companion animals as entrees on menus, but now the concept has become less palatable because more people in the region are keeping animals as pets. The ban is part of a larger plan to toughen laws on animal welfare in China. Individuals could face up to 15 days in prison and a small fine. In businesses, it's much higher, up to $75,000 in fines. So a real plus in animal protection over there in China. In Michigan, Drivers of electric cars are finding they have more than enough juice to go wherever they want. Originally, the fear was that drivers of electric vehicles would run out of power before reaching their destination. It's actually called range anxiety. Now, automotive designers say there is more endurance than previously anticipated. Most get to their destination without public charging. A survey of more than 150 drivers of the BMW Mini E battery car found the 100-mile-a-day daily charge was completely adequate. And drivers of the cars have also created a network amongst themselves so they could juice up with each other in case of an emergency. And finally, you got a fur coat gathering dust? The Humane Society suggests the ultimate recycling, putting it on the backs of other animals. The Coats for Cubs program helps orphaned, injured, or sick wildlife by gathering fur coats and sending them for nest, bedding, or cuddly replacements for the moms and dads of the animals. Reporting live from the universe here on VividLifeRadio.com. We are starting the show. Our guest today is Gregg Braden. He is a fabulous author, a scientist, and really a visionary at the forefront of this movement of understanding this massive opening of awareness and awakening in the world today. So, Gregg Braden, welcome to the show.
Well, it is a pleasure to be on the program. I'm thrilled, even with our technical issues. I'm thrilled to be here. Is this signal coming across to you okay, Kristen? Am I sounding all right?
Yeah, you sound fantastic, and I understand that you have re-released Fractal Time. Can you tell us a little bit about the premise of that book?
Well, sure. The release of Fractal Time was originally released. The hardback cover version was released in March of '09. Went into paperback, and that's the re-release I think you're referring to earlier this year, March of this year. And it is a book that was about 30 years in the making, Kristen. It's the marriage of the best science of today with some of our most cherished and core spiritual principles of our past, and the perspective of our universe as a cyclic universe, cyclic experiences, whether we're talking about the day in, day out experiences in our personal lives that last maybe only moments or hours, or we're talking about huge systems of time that last for thousands of years. Almost universally, ancient texts and traditions and our ancestors saw our lives in terms of cycles. And I was trained as a scientist in the 60s and the 70s, and this is probably something, it's the least of what is described in terms of modern science and the scientific way of looking at the world. And where this becomes very important is when we're looking for explanations to try to understand, to help us understand and give us insight into the mysteries of our world and our lives. The Western linear view of time just doesn't really lend itself to explaining those mysteries. So we were trained to think of ourselves in terms of an ancient civilization that began a long time ago. It's gotten progressively more and more complex and reached the point where we are today. That's a linear view. Well, from the ancient perspective, that view is only one cycle of time, and there were cycles that existed before that and cycles that existed before that. And the parameters that allow the world to be what it is, whether we're talking about climate change or we're talking about the rise and fall of civilizations or global war and global peace or our ability to grow food or disease, all of those things occur, it appears, on a cyclic basis. So if we can understand the cycles of the past, it helps us to know what we can realistically expect when they occur in our lives today and in the future. And this is the premise of Fractal Time. It is using these very simple yet very fundamental views of cyclic experiences, personal and collective, to help us know why the world is changing the way it's changing. I have this conversation with my mom all the time, and for Mom, without her view of a cyclic universe, she just tells me it looks like the world's gone to hell in a handbasket. This is the way she sees it, and it's really easy to see separate, isolated, disparate things breaking down, whether we're talking about the economy or we're talking about systems of government, we're talking about healthcare, whatever it is, it's easy to see them as isolated experiences. When we step back and look at the big picture and see how those systems are cyclic and how they fit into the larger cycles of time, all of a sudden what we see is those are symptoms. The breakdown of the things that we're seeing in our world are symptoms of an even larger cycle. And because the cycle has happened in the past, if we know where and how to look into the past, it gives us a realistic idea of what we can expect and what we can do. Of course, many people are talking about the year 2012 right now, and 2012 is certainly a part of the cycles, but it's in all honesty, it's not the focus. 2012 is a date that was identified on ancient systems of timekeeping to mark the end of a 5,125-year-long cycle. But the Mayans were also very clear that within that 5,000 years, a lot of other smaller cycles would come to a close, would come to completion. And each time one cycle ends, the next one begins. And it's that little place in between, just for a moment in time, when one cycle ends, before the next one begins, there's a place that physicists call the choice point. And it's in this choice point where neither cycle exists for a brief period of time. And if we understand that that choice point exists and that that's the place where our choices become even more potent than ever, then it helps us to tip the scales of life and balance in our favor as we see these cycles unfolding in our lives. So in a nutshell, this is what the book Fractal Time is all about.
Now, I have seen you speak live several times, and for those of you who are listening who haven't seen Gregg live, I really encourage you to attend one of his events. You pack an incredible amount of information into that time.
Well, thank you for that. Part of it, and for people who haven't been with us, my programs are very visual, and I do that intentionally. Mm-hmm. Because what I've found, first of all, we learn better that way. We are
Absolutely.
Yeah, we are multisensory beings, and if we can listen to words as well as listen to sounds, as well as see the images and feel and taste, and really feel in our hearts the impact from this material, it really helps to make this very real and very complete in our lives. So in the live programs, where I share with our audiences the images from the places that I've gone in the world that have helped me to understand what it is that we're talking about. Some of the most isolated and remote and pristine and magnificent, beautiful places remaining on the earth today, the monasteries in the Himalayas, in Nepal and in Tibet and India, throughout Bolivia and Peru in the Andean mountains. Some of the ancient sites right here in our backyard in the American Desert Southwest. And the people that we have met and shared our time with, our global family that live in these places, that have preserved the memory in their culture of the cycles that we're talking about now, when they arrive, what they mean to us. In many cases, they preserve the memories that we've either lost or forgotten altogether in our Western technological world. And so we bring that to life from the stage, and I think for me, I learn something every time I offer a program, just because people ask new questions that draw from me an answer that I may have never shared before from the experience that I'm sharing on that slide. So I appreciate your kind words about the programs, and you can tell I'm really passionate about sharing this. It's a lot of fun to share this material, but it's also very deep. A very deep experience to know what these cycles mean in our lives and the role that they play in our lives today.
Well, I think you raised such an important point that about the choice point, and this is what I got when I saw you live, is that we're talking about larger world cycles, as you call them, but that it also boils down to just our own personal experience, and that in each moment in between these cycles that we can choose a different outcome. And that was very empowering, and I would like you to elaborate on that for all of us, that, we're not on this doomsday track, that even in our personal lives and on a global level, that if we come from our hearts, that we can shift the course by just making a different choice when this opportunity is coming up, and I understand that's right now.
Well, absolutely, and in answer to your question, I'm mindful of the time that we have on the program today. So I'll begin by saying briefly, when we talk about a cycle, a cycle can be a few seconds, it can be a few moments, it can be years, it can be thousands of years. The principles that govern the cycles are the same, whether they're brief or whether they're lengthy cycles. Each cycle begins with an event that is called the seed, S-E-E-D, the seed event. It can be a personal event of loss and hurt and betrayal, or success and abundance and joy. It can be a global event of war or peace. It simply is an event that occurs for the first time that we have a strong emotional response to. And that seed sets into motion a pattern of energy that will repeat on a regular basis, on a cyclic basis, that we can calculate, that we can predict using very, very simple mathematics. The same simple mathematics that tell us about the orbits of the moon around the Earth or the planets around the sun. These are very simple math. These are very simple mathematics because we now know that nature itself is simple. It's only as complex as we choose to make it. So while we can use big computers and some really complicated-looking formulas to describe these things, we can also use our laptop computers and some very simple mathematics, and we do this in the book Fractal Time. Once we understand where the cycle begins, then we can calculate when it repeats. And whether, again, it's a cycle of hurt and betrayal in our personal lives or war and peace on the planet, when the cycle ends and before the next one begins, there is a place where neither exists for a brief period of time. And in 1958, a physicist at Princeton University coined a term for this place. It was called a choice point. Choice point. And a choice point is the place where we learn to optimize these cycles. So clearly we can make a choice any moment, any time during the day, and choices are good, and we make them all the time. But these are places where our choices have the greatest potency. I think we can say it that way in our lives, where we really stack the deck in our favor for the choices to tip the scales, the tipping point of balance and life in our favor. And if we know, for example, the year 2012 is a choice point many people are talking about, but if we're really clear about the indigenous traditions and the prophecies, what they say is that 2012 is the year that we begin a new cycle with all of the things in place that have already happened, which means all of the changes have to happen before 2012. And I think this is the beauty of understanding how these cycles work. The choice points between right now, the year 2010, and the next 12 to 18 months leading up into this 2012 cycle, the choice points that are coming up for us are the choice points that stem from some of the great pivotal moments of the last 100 years that define our world as it is today. For example, a choice point, global war. The first time we experienced global war in the modern world was the year 1914. First time we experienced an economic collapse in the modern world was the year 1929. The first year we experienced a global flu pandemic was the year 1918. And these are just some examples. All of those are seeds for cycles that are repeating again in the next 12 to 18 months. And when we begin looking at it, it looks scary at first. You say, well, wow, all these cycles are going to repeat. It doesn't mean that the actual events themselves must repeat. It means that the conditions are ripe for those things to happen. And it also means if that's when the cycle ends, then it also opens the door to the choice point. And it means within the next 12 to 18 months, we have the choice point, rare, precious moments in time where we can redefine the hurtful patterns of the past, of economic collapse, of global war, of global disease. We can redefine those patterns and set new patterns into motion for the next cycle that forever walk away from the kind of suffering we've seen in the last 100 years. And this is, I think, what our ancestors were trying to tell us about this 2012 window of time, is that it is a time of great change. But the things that seem to go through the greatest change are the systems that are no longer sustainable in our world. And if we look at the things that are changing right now, the things that seem to be breaking down, excuse me, Kristen, I think that's exactly what we're seeing, the unsustainable ways of living, of sharing food, of sharing resources, of caring for one another across borders, economic systems, the way we create electricity and create fuel to power this planet. All of those things that may have served us into the past so well that they brought us to where we are right now, when the world changed, those systems are no longer sustainable, and those are the things that are breaking down. The choice points are all about whether or not we try to prop up the old unsustainable ways of living, or whether or not we can let them go and embrace new, empowering ways of sharing life and resources in this world. And 2012 appears to be this window of time that our ancestors identified when all of this would come to a focus, and we need to make those choices. So I think for us to understand the choice point, when a cycle ends, it opens the door of opportunity for us to redefine those patterns of the past and set new, empowering, life-affirming patterns into motion, excuse me, for the next cycle.
You know, you've also shown us in your work how powerful the human heart is, and you demonstrated this from some of the beautiful artwork in these remote temples, but also to your Global Coherence program, which I'd love for you to tell us all about that. I think it's the Global Coherence Initiative, but how our hearts really do register our emotions as a community, have an impact on the world as a whole.
Well, this is precisely, and this is for me what brings full circle this bridge between science and spirituality. We in the modern world have been conditioned to believe that science and spirituality are mutually exclusive and that we must follow one path or the other. And what our own science now is telling us, however, is that they are actually different languages speaking of very nearly the same thing. And the issue and the discoveries around the human heart are where this is really coming to focus. So our modern science now, within the last 3 years, I think 2006 was the first year these discoveries were published in peer-reviewed journals, is the fact, and this is a fact now, that the human heart is the single organ in our bodies that produces the strongest electrical field and the strongest magnetic field in the body, about 100 times stronger electrically than the brain, and about 5,000 times stronger magnetically than the heart. Than the brain. This is our heart produces these fields. And this is important for us to know because our world is made of these fields. Our world is made of electrical and magnetic fields. And everyone is connected through the magnetic fields of planet Earth. There is no them and us. Every leader of every nation, every CEO of every corporation, every soldier, every peacemaker, everywhere in the world, every blade of grass and every form of life are all linked through the magnetic fields of the Earth. And where this becomes really important for us to understand this is that our own science now is showing when many people come together and create the feelings in their hearts that produce the strongest forms of the magnetic fields, then we link with these fields of the Earth, and there is a measurable effect. We can actually measure the change in the magnetic fields of the Earth when humans create the feelings in their heart that touch those fields, and we can measure those. They're so powerful. We can measure them from satellites 22,000 miles above the surface of the Earth. And what brings us full circle is the way to access those fields is by following the instructions that were left for us in 5,000-year-old texts about feelings, not thoughts, but feelings in the heart, genuine feelings of care, appreciation, gratitude, compassion. In the English language, these are the kinds of words that have been scientifically demonstrated to create what is called a coherent effect or a coherent field between the heart and the brain. And when we create that coherence, we're actually linking into this greater magnetic field of the world where everyone else is already linked in as well. And a relatively few number of people that choose to create and experience care and gratitude and compassion in their lives actually can share that benefit in the field with many others, even though others may not be consciously doing this process in their heart, by simply moving into our hearts, moving out of our brains, moving into our hearts, following the principles of some of our most cherished spiritual traditions, not religions, but the spiritual principles that underlie the religions. What we found is we can positively impact these fields of the earth. And when we create this coherence as individuals, we are healthier. We have stronger immune systems. We think better. We solve problems better. We are less aggressive. We're more willing to cooperate to solve our problems as individuals. And when many people have these experiences together, then those individual experiences actually become the collective experience, because we're linked through these fields. And I've seen this happen in a corporate boardroom where one or two people will create these coherent fields in their hearts, and all of a sudden, angry people in the corporate boardroom, the anger goes away, it dissipates, and nobody has to say a word about why. The field is just simply not there to support the anger any longer. And suddenly they become more cooperative and more willing to work together and solve the problems. Studies have shown that this works on a broad geographic area in times of war. The studies that were published in the Journal of Conflict Resolution, 1988, showed that as few as 200 people creating peace in their hearts, not thinking it in their brains, but peace in their hearts, actually had a statistically measurable effect in the Middle East during the first Israeli-Lebanese war. So while scientists don't fully understand, no one fully understands all that there is to know, we do understand enough that we know there's an effect. And there is a correlation between the time when people feel what we call feelings that create coherence in the heart, between the time that happens and the reduction of crimes against people and traffic accidents and emergency hospital room visits and terrorism in large geographic areas. There is an effect. And so although we don't understand everything there is to know, I believe that we can apply what we do know to help us to become better people and create a better world while we're continuing to study and learn more. And this is what brings the book Fractal Time full circle, because it identifies the cycles of time in general, where we are in those cycles right now, why this is such a pivotal moment in the history of our planet and our nation and our lives. And then it takes us full circle, as I mentioned, and tells us how we make the choices that tip the scales of life in our favor, and we make those choices through the coherent experiences of the human heart. So in a nutshell, that's what all of this work is all about, and this is, I think, for the first time, this is the first science-based initiative where many people are being brought together and taught coherence, and the equipment is being designed and implemented to measure the fields of the earth in response to human emotion. And this is what this global coherence project is all about that you mentioned hearing me speak about in the live programs.
And they can find this on your website, correct?
Absolutely. If people would like to know more about global coherence, there's an organization that's the Institute of Heart Math, HEART, capital MATH. It's all one word. They are heading up this global project, the Global Coherence Initiative. I'm on the advisory board and the steering committee, and this is I want to share that for transparency and also my passion for this project. It's the first time we've ever seen this, Kristen. It's the first time we've seen the scientific community backing the principles of an inner experience to have an effect on our outer world on a global basis. to the best of my knowledge, this has never happened before. The sensors are being built and deployed that are measuring specifically the magnetic fields of the Earth so that we can see them change in response to the coherent experiences of individuals and groups of people. And the coherence is something that can be learned as an individual. It can be taught easily. People can be trained to share it with others. Children can learn it very easily. And the beauty is that we don't have to change or shift our belief system to experience coherence. In other words, whether we're a Muslim or a Hindu or a Christian or a Buddhist or an atheist or follow pagan traditions, whatever our tradition has been, when we do it from the place of coherence, it seems to have a positive benefit for that particular way of honoring our relationship to the world. And I think this is one of the reasons it's been so widely embraced, because it is like a way to increase and hone the effect of an existing practice, rather than asking someone to throw away everything they've learned for a lifetime and try something new. It doesn't work that way at all. So coherence is attractive to people from different cultures, from different traditions, across borders, across languages, because I think it speaks to this fundamental experience of the human heart that we share almost universally.
From what I understand, it was the world's emotional response to the events of 9/11 that showed us that there was a scientific way to measure emotional resonance or reaction to these events.
Yeah, it was, and that's the irony. I think one of the most horrifying events in recent memory was actually the event that triggered the scientific awareness of our relationship to these fields. I alluded to this earlier, and I did it quickly, again, in the interest of time, and now I'll flesh it out a little bit. There are two satellites. They're called stationary or geosynchronous, or stationary satellites, positioned over North America, one off the East Coast, one off the West Coast. Every 30 minutes, their job is to send data back to the scientists of the Earth to tell the scientists how strong the magnetic fields of the Earth are. So every 30 minutes, these signals are coming back. The satellites are 22,000 miles above the surface of the planet, and that's a long distance, and they're measuring these fields of the Earth. Each day, each 24-hour day, the fields ebb and flow. They rise and they fall, and you can see, on charts, day after day, there's a rise and a fall. It's kind of a very rhythmic-looking graph. And there was one day the scientists were looking at this graph, and there was a big spike. I mean, they just shot way up on one day, and they overlaid the data from the satellites onto a calendar of days and weeks. And it's probably no surprise to anyone on this program that's listening that the spike occurred on September 11th, 2001. But specifically, the spike occurred at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on September 11th, and that was just about 15 minutes after the first plane hit the first tower of the World Trade Center. And scientists estimate it took about 15 minutes for the images, those horrifying images, to make it around the world and for people to respond. And the scientists say, my God, what could possibly cause a spike in the very field of the Earth that connects and sustains all life on the Earth? What could cause that kind of a spike? And when they realized that the spike coincided with the emotional response of millions of people in a little window of time in response to 9/11, the scientists, they literally said, oh my God, because we're taught that we're separate from our world and have very little influence upon our world, and vice versa in terms of these fields. And this showed that we are so connected with the magnetic fields of the Earth that when many of us have a heart-based experience, a genuine emotional experience, not a thought, but this is a heart-based experience, that our pooled, our collective emotion has the power to literally shift the very fields of the earth that connect and sustain all life in a positive way. And this set the scientists, the scientific community, on a new path of discovery, showing how we can do this intentionally without having a horrifying event like 9/11 to trigger it. And this is what the Global Coherence Initiative is all about, teaching people to choose to become coherent and create these heart experiences without having a horrible event to respond to make that happen.
And that really leads to our last question, because I think that's all we're going to have time for with you, is for those people who want to actively engage and open their hearts, how can they tell in their lives when they're reaching one of these choice points? I mean, what can they look for so they know this is the moment that I can choose something different? Well,
there's two questions you asked there. First of all, the choice points. I talk about this on the website. So it's Gregg Braden, GreggBraden.com. You can go to that website. There is a button that says "The world is in crisis. You can help." Click that button, and it will follow the links, and that will tell you everything you need to know about the Global Coherence Initiative. And on the same website, there is a calculator that has all the instructions, and it's also in the book, Fractal Time, on how to calculate the cycles of time that you're asking about, whether it's a personal cycle of hurt and loss and betrayal, or love, success, and abundance, or a global cycle of war and peace, or anything else, economic success or collapse. All of those cycles we can calculate using the time code calculator that is on the website with all the instructions are right there. Once we find out when the cycles repeat, that opens the door to the choice point, and it is the coherent experience, moving into our hearts to make the choices, to feel the feeling of abundance. For example, if we're on a repeat cycle of loss and betrayal, someone's taken all the money out of our account and left us with nothing, and that's a cycle that shows up again and again and again in relationships. When we see that choice point coming up, we can move into our hearts and feel the opposite. Feel the feeling. Claim in our hearts the feeling of success and abundance. Feel what it feels like to have those things already present in our lives, and give thanks of appreciation and gratitude for those things, and compassion for the experiences of the past. And although it sounds really, really simple, these are the core principles of the spiritual traditions that have been preserved in the monasteries for 3,000 or 4,000 years. And they are the very principles that scientists now tell us trigger this shift in energy in our hearts that links us into these fields and again, tips these scales of life and balance in our favor. These are how we make the best of these tipping points, the choice points.
Gregg Braden, wonderful author. Thank you so much for this time today, and I love having you on as a guest.
Well, Kristen, thank you for being such a gracious host. It was fast today, and you did really well.
Yeah, we have a lot of listeners, so hopefully we will have you on again in the future. So, again, have a wonderful day.
I look forward to it. Take care.
Bye-bye, Gregg.
Bye-bye.
Okay, to all of you listening, going to be talking about monetizing your passion. So if you have some ideas that you would like to turn into a career path, please join us. That's going to be right after the break. But first, a few announcements, and when we come back, Rich